This video is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock.
Hello, and welcome back to another day in the arena. It's me, it's CGB, and you have found the crafting guide for IKORIA. The crafting guide is not your typical set review. I am focused specifically on MTG Arena, and specifically on how many copies of a card you may want to craft if you want to play Standard in MTG Arena with IKORIA. Now, of course, what to craft and what colors you like is subjective. So if you're only into white cards, for example, and not into black cards, feel free to skip my recommendations for black. But to try to take everything about the crafting guide to the next level, we're not only recommending how many you should craft, we're also putting which kind of decks you would play this in, and we're putting sample deck lists for nearly every card that I recommend crafting, so that you can get an idea if this is the kind of deck that you want to play in the upcoming Standard. Most players, most YouTubers, most content creators will look at a card and say, yes, I think we want this, but they don't tell you how many to spend those hard-earned rare and mythic wildcards on, and then quite often, you might spend those wild cards, then go to brew your deck, and then see that there's just better options, and there's no reason to play the card. It doesn't even make the final 60 or 75, and that is always a bit of a feels bad. So I'm putting out the most complete product I can to avoid those feels bads for all of you, and I hope you find it helpful. While I will surely get some things wrong, I think for the most part, I do a pretty good job saying what you should pick up and what you should avoid. So that's the plan. There's a link in the description. This is open to all. As you see, there are about 13 people logged in right now looking at this. So all of you can access it and look at it at any time and review it. The links to the deck lists are live. You can open any single one of them to go to AetherHub to see the deck list on the hub. So all these deck lists are available to all of you to peruse. And I hope that it gives you a direction with how to use wild cards with this set. So that's mainly what we're here for. Also, before we dive in, the music is from Harris Heller. Harris Heller released some YouTube and Twitch friendly music albums that I enjoy a lot, and he runs the Alpha Gaming channel on YouTube, which shows people how to improve their streams and content. So you can check that out if you wish. Probably a link in description too, if I remember to do it, or in comments. I usually like to pin a comment with information people want. We're going to be moving fast because there are a lot of cards to cover. We are only covering the rare cards and the uncommon cards. So, because I just think that uncommon and common wild cards, most people can come across those as they need them. And it's not the end of it. It's not that much of a feels bad if you craft an uncommon that doesn't turn out to do everything that you wanted to do. I think you'll be okay. Rares and mythics are another story. So let's dive in. Starting in white, the Cub Warden. Cub Warden, a 3/5 4-mana lifelink that mutates for 2 and a white. Whenever this creature mutates, create 2 1/1 white cat creature tokens with lifelink. If you haven't seen anybody talk about mutate, there is some nice reminder text. If you cast this spell for its mutate cost, put it over or under target non-human you control. They mutate into the top creature plus all the abilities from under it. So it only has 1 power and toughness, it only has 1 casting cost. But it does have all of the abilities of the creature under it, and it only has the card types of the type on top. This is basically 4 mana. You get a 3/5, and it has lifelink, and if you mutate it onto something else, you get 2 cats. Some white aggro decks might say they want this, some white life decks, but honestly, I can't recommend crafting this card because I don't even think it's better than the other 4-drops you could be playing. I have this as a recommended 0, and you can grab 2 for your lifelink cats decks if it really just speaks to you. Granith Magistrate is 1 and a white human wizard. Your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. 1/3. So the things that this shuts down that people are excited about would be Escape. There are various other things. Adventure and Escape are probably the 2 big ones, but basically Into the Wilds doing nothing sounds really funny. But it's too narrow of a card, and while you may get tilted when you lose to certain types of cards, unless Graveyard Reanimator becomes an epic part of the meta somehow, This card is not going to be a very big deal, and it's too narrow for me to recommend crafting, even for sideboard. I think there are better ways to attack these strategies than playing a 2-mana 1/3 that for the most part won't be able to attack, block, will sit on the battlefield until it gets killed by a Ritual Soot or a Shatter the Sky, and then Uro comes back anyway. So I have a big ugly 0 on Dranith Magistrate. In general, what you're going to find is that the monocolored cards are a lot worse than the multicolored cards. So we're going to be going through the monocolored rares pretty quickly. Next up is Lava Brink Venture. This is 2 and white human soldier. It enters the battlefield, you choose odd or even. It has protection from each converted mana cost of the chosen value. This card might be better than I think. This is one of the ones that I think is sneaky, but 3 mana for a 3/3 isn't terrible, but it isn't good. And exactly what kind of deck wants this? Almost no decks are playing 3 mana creatures that don't have haste or do something much stronger than this. And while you can give it protection from half the things out there, it's still vulnerable to the others, and sweepers still clean it up pretty easily as long as they're not damage based. I'm cold on the Lava Brink Venturer. It may require a little more testing. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I have this as a 0, another 0. We're start out with 3 zeros. Not feeling the set, you might think, but then out of nowhere comes a mythic, Luminous Broodmoth, and our first Godzilla alt art print. I'm a big fan of these, so you'll see these alt art prints as we go. Whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's 4 mana for a 3/4 flying insect. That on its own is not good. In this format, things are too fast, and it's kind of limited stats to play a 4 mana 3/4 flyer. But the ability is bonkers as long as you can use it the turn that Mothra, the Luminous Broodmoth, comes into play. So you want this deck. Like, this card can go absolutely nuts in a deck that can create value the turn you play Mothra with no mana spent. And what I mean by that is using Die's abilities and Enter the Battlefield abilities in combination with Witch's Oven, Priest of the Forgotten Gods, and Woe Strider. We're all pretty familiar with Sacrifice. The deck that I brewed around this that I think is absolutely wacko has Priest of the Forgotten Gods, Mayhem Devil, Cruel Celebrant, Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven, Midnight Reaper, Woe Strider, all kinds of ways so that when you slam the Moth, you also do a ton of damage, draw a bunch of cards, gain a bunch of life, make a bunch of tokens, things like that. And I think that's the way that you want to play the Broodmoth. It could fit in some other places as quote-unquote sweeper protection, but I'm not a believer. I think that most of the time you're going to walk into a counter or a single point removal and then get swept anyway. So while the card could work in that space, I think this is the house for it. If you don't want to play the Cat Oven decks, I don't think you should craft the Broodmoth unless you have a serious brew up your sleeve that you're interested in trying out. But yes, I have this as the first 4 because I think in that deck it is freaking nuts, and I think that 4 copies is totally justified specifically for that deck. Next card is the Mythos of Snap decks. And this is a Tragic Arrogance style reprint. 2 white sorcery. Each player chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from the non-land permanents they control. They sacrifice the rest. If red and black is spent to cast the spell, making it a Mardu spell, you choose the permanents for each player instead. Now, when you get to choose the permanents, you can really mess an opponent up. And I have this rated as a 2 because I think it's a good sideboard card, specifically in decks like the one that we just looked at, where if you're against another player creating a wide board and you resolve this, you absolutely devastate them. It also forces each player to sacrifice those other permanents, and Mayhem Devil is a card. So this can be an epic blow with Mayhem Devil. So I have this rated as a 2, although I'm sure that will mostly be in the sideboard. And in best of 1, if you wanted to skip it, I wouldn't blame you too much. And I think it's a decent card, but not a broken card. Into black, Dirge Bat. Epic text. Dirge Bat is 2 black creature bat, mutates for 6 flash flying. Whenever this creature mutates, destroy target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls 3/3. Yes, the mutate ability is very, very expensive, but it's important to know that a creature that has mutate Their mutate ability triggers whenever another creature mutates onto them. So while the Dirge Bat might be expensive on its own, if another creature mutates with the Dirge Bat, it triggers the destroy ability as well as the mutate ability of the creature that mutated. There are some cheaper mutate options that will come to soon that make this much more playable. And Flash itself makes this much more playable because it's harder to interact with a Flash creature. When your opponent actually taps low, then you flash this in, and then you untap, and then you mutate onto it, they don't get a chance to interact. So this bat is quite the blowout waiting to happen for patient and careful players. So I think it's better than it looks. I currently have the bat rated as a 2 of on the guide, and I do have a few decks that I've brewed up with it. This one actually runs 4 of it because it's really built around the flash mechanic. And it is a flash/mutate Dimir deck with a bunch of new cards that we'll also cover as we go. One that's worth covering from the uncommon slot is Heartless Act. This destroys a creature with no counters on it, or it removes 3 counters from a creature. Basically 2 mana kill things. So this is going to be a new removal spell to watch out for, and it really adds a lot to the color black, which was kind of lagging behind green, blue in the recent format quite a bit, so I'm happy to see that. Extinction Event. Extinction Event is 3 and a black for a sorcery. Choose odd or even. Exile each creature with converted mana cost of the chosen value. 0 is even. This is a really cool card. Getting to exile one set of cards or another is pretty nice. Getting to choose means you can set this up so that you have something out there while your opponent loses their best things. You can often 2-for-1 this, but at its worst, as long as the opponent controls creatures, you're exiling a creature of some point, and probably not losing anything of your own, as you can do things like chump block or just slow roll your own creatures. So I have this rated as a 2. I think it can be a big sideboard card play. I think it also works with a certain companion we'll come to later, so there are some odds and even things in the deck, and it can be a blowout against certain companions that force the opponent to only play cards of a certain type. So I'm a fan of Extinction Event. I think it's mostly a sideboard player, but it will definitely see play in upcoming decks, so I have it recommended at a 2. And the deck I have built around it is a Sultai mid-range deck, which has plenty of other interesting cards that we'll get to. Hunted Nightmare is 3 mana for a 4/5 menace. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent puts a death touch counter on a creature they control. At first, when you see this card, you see 3 mana for a 4/5 menace, and you think, oh my gosh, if Magic were anything like it was for every year up until 2019, this would be worth a look, because the downside isn't that bad. However, my experience with the new set has been any inch that you give your opponent, since Eldraine and Theros Beyond Death took over the meta, any inch you give them will lose you the game. Giving them a death touch counter just means this probably won't get to attack or block very much. The opponent chooses what gets the death touch counter, so they'll always put it on the thing that's hard to interact with. And it's just, even if the opponent has no creatures, and you play a 3 mana 4/5 menace Nightmare, have you met Teferi? It doesn't have haste, it doesn't have an ability when it enters the battlefield, it doesn't do anything when it dies. It fails to pass all the tests of what a good creature can be in the format. So for now, I have the Hunted Nightmare at a 0. This could be an okay sideboard card against red, but the problem with red is this doesn't stop Embercleave. It's a big nasty body, but it doesn't stop Embercleave. Lovestruck Beast is a lot better than this is. Rotting Regisaur is bigger. I just don't see the world where Hunted Nightmare is the card that you want. Next up is the Mythos of Nithroi, and this is an instant, destroy target non-land permanent if it's a creature, or if green-white was spent to cast the spell. It's a very weird framing for what essentially means if you spend 3 mana that is Abzan, you get to destroy target non-land permanent. Once again, if this was any year but 2019 to 2020 Magic, you would look at this and say the ability to instantly destroy any permanent is really, really good. But nowadays, 1-for-1 removal just means you're falling behind, because every card is a 2-for-1. Every single card gets you value when it enters the battlefield, has haste, gets you value when it dies, etc. And if you spend 3 mana, you're really falling behind. If you're going to spend mana to remove a threat, it has to be 1 or 2 mana in this format. So I'm not as excited about this as I want to be. That said, the versatility means it can hit anything from a Lucky Clover all the way up to an Ugin, a Planeswalker. So I don't think this is a 0. I have this down as a 2. I think it's a good glue for Abzan decks. And there's a little Abzan, what I call Abzan infinite sadness brewed up here. Poor Abzan. Poor Abzan. Imagine playing green without Hydroid Krasis. It's just... But who knows? Maybe there's something out there. I think that 2 Mythos of Nethroi is going to treat you pretty well, though. That's my recommendation. Diving into blue, we get another Mythos. This is the Mythos of... This is the Mythos of Illuna. It is 2 blue sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target permanent. If Temur was spent to cast the spell, instead create a token that's a copy of the permanent, and the token has, when this permanent enters the battlefield, if it's a creature, it fights up to 1 creature you don't control. This is an interesting card because it can copy any permanent on the battlefield. Anything it can target. That includes lands. That includes enchantments. That includes creatures and planeswalkers. So copying the opponent's planeswalker or the opponent's Elspeth Conquers Death or something like that is pretty interesting. Without question, it's a little goofy. And the fact that you can pay the red-green to make it fight is interesting too, because while you can copy your own things, and that's always fun, the idea that you can play Mythos of Luna to copy the opponent's questing beast to make your own questing beast and then make it fight the questing beast that you copied, it means this is also in a way a 4-mana removal spell. So it's all a little bit weird, but it's interesting, and I think there's plenty of fun stuff you can do with this card. Enough so that I'm willing to try 1 copy in my Temur decks, but I don't want to draw this in multiples. The memers out there might go a little harder on this, but I think in competitive play, flooding on this is not where you want to be. So currently I have this rated as a 1. Just get 1 out there and see what happens. We can take a quick look at the deck I recommend for it, which is an Elemental best of 1 build. In Elementals, of course, you have a lot of cool stuff to make copies of from, Risen Reef is pretty much it, or Healer of the Glade, or Cavalier of Thorns, etc. Agent of Treachery is a card you can copy. So there's plenty of room to glue in Mythos of Illuna, and that's without copying your opponent's things. The Sea-Octopus is next. This card is pretty nutty. I originally put it as a 0 because I was skeptical of how it would do as a 3-mana 2/2 without a lot of good mutate stuff, and Mono Blue didn't have the access to protection. But now that I've seen mutate and process to how the mechanic works a little bit more, I think that this card is a decent card on its own, but I think the best role for this card is triggering other mutate triggers, because while it doesn't have a mutate trigger itself, when you mutate onto a mutant, you trigger their trigger. So triggering the Dirge Bat, for example, and making this a 3/3 flyer that destroyed target creature or planeswalker, and whenever it attacks and hits the opponent, you draw another card, is a ton of value. Flash is also one of the most pushed mechanics in the set, and with all the Flash cards, this is one of the better ones. So this card will interact favorably with a number of other cards in the set. So I have Sea-Octopus pushed in at 4, crafting 4 copies. I do think that the main mistake people are going to make with this card, though, is they're going to immediately try to build the mono blue deck that rotated last year. And that deck doesn't exist anymore. Spell Pierce and Dive Down were the real crucial parts of that deck. They kept you from losing your creature after you threw your Curious Obsessions all on one Siren Storm Tamer. If you throw this right onto a Flash Spirit Pirate guy, whose name is escaping me at the moment, but Spectral Sailor, and the opponent removes it, you will be so far behind you will probably never recover. And it's very unlikely that you'll just get to make that mutation and attack 3 or 4 times in the current meta. So I think you're going to have to play a different kind of game and pick your spots with this card. Only against something like Mono Green do you want to just slam this on turn 2 onto a Spectral Sailor and try to draw multiple cards. I think it's more of a player's card than, say, the Mono Blue Tempo deck was last year with Dive Down and Spell Pierce, those cards that gave you free wins. All right. I think that's enough about the Octopus, but if you want to play Flash, 4 copies is where I would go. Next up is a very exciting card that people are absolutely hyped about, Shark Typhoon. This is 5 in a blue enchantment, but you're not going to cast it that way too often. It says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create an XX shark creature token with flying, where X is the spell's converted mana cost, and it has cycling X, 1 blue, discard this card, draw a card. Whenever you cycle the Typhoon, create XX blue shark creature token with flying. It doesn't seem OP at all, as the raid is kind of a worse Hydroid Crisis, because you have to spend the 2 just like Hydroid Crisis, but even if you put 6 mana into this, you only draw one card. Excuse me. The power of the card is in the cycling mechanic itself. Cycling is not a spell. It's not an alternate casting cost, it's an ability, which means you can cycle this and it's uncounterable. You can cycle this even if your opponent has Teferi on the board at the end of their turn. You can cycle this, and there's not much the opponent can do about it. And you create a body, you replace itself with a card, and now you have a body to mutate onto, or to attack an opposing planeswalker, or to just swing for lethal, especially if you have your own Teferi and they can't interact with it. I think that makes the Shark Typhoon a much more interesting card than people realize, and it's something I would love to have 1 or 2 copies of in all of my late game control decks. So I have this at a 2. A 2 is the recommendation on the Typhoon. That said, you can go full meme with the Cyclotron Jeskai combo deck, which has nearly everything that cycles, all kinds of nonsense that some cards will cover later, and a companion, which we'll also cover later. But this meme of a deck sounds pretty fun. Voracious Great Shark is 3 blue flash. When it enters the battlefield, counter an artifact or creature spell. 5/4. My god. I can't wait to play some fun Shark Tribal decks, but as far as competitive, is there space for 5 mana, counter target creature, make a 5/4? I'm not sure. I think that the right crafting number is 1. Try this in those Dimir Flash decks, maybe try this in a Simic Flash deck, see if it shines. So, I definitely think it's a good enough card to see play. I don't think it's a good enough card to take over the meta, which leaves me at a cautious craft 1 copy, and go get 'em, Jaws. Moving into red, we have Red's Destroy, a perfect life form. Actually, Everquill Phoenix. This is that sweet Godzilla alt art, which has a mutate 3 and a red flying. When it mutates, create a red artifact token named Feather, the sacrifice Feather for 1. Return a Phoenix from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This is a 4/4. So, the Phoenix of the set, is this one actually good? I don't think so. On its own, it's a 4/4 flyer for 4, which isn't on par with what we play in Standard right now. Sphinx of Foresight only gets played because drawing fires is necessary and busted. On the other hand, if you mutate it onto something, it becomes a 4/4 with virtual haste because it can attack right away, assuming the creature was already on the board. And that's not bad, but is it Torbrand? Is it Embercleave? I mean, those cards are just absolutely nuts, and I just don't see this card seeing play. Maybe if there's a full-on mutate-themed deck, and it has red and it has room in it, but I don't see it. To me, this is a very, very average card, a return to the more mopier Phoenix cards that we used to see in the past. It's rare, it's not mythic, and but I'm just not into it. So I have this as a 0. Also, in before the memes, I have all of the red rares rated at 0, and all of the blue rares rated at craft at least 1. So maybe my bias is showing a little bit. No! Link fail. It happens, guys. It happens. Don't hate me. Gotta update it because people be looking at this. So, Luca the Coppercoat Outcast is an epic wall of text, and I'm gonna quick sum it for you. +1, look at 3 cards, and if they're creatures, you can play them while Luca's alive. -2, exile a creature, search library, put creature onto battlefield. -7, each creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So, Luca is a new planeswalker. It's interesting. The plus interacts well with creatures. The minus interacts well-ish with creatures. But if you run a lot of creatures, it's a bit too random. I think that Luca's presence in the meta depends entirely on if the minus is a broken combo, and if that broken combo is good enough. I have this currently at a 0 because I don't believe a 5-mana Planeswalker is really going to take over things. This card could slot into decks like Fires and Elementals, but is it really better than the Cavaliers? I think the answer is absolutely not. And so the deck that I would play with this is this nutty deck that I saw on a Star City Games video, which is you play a ton of Planeswalkers that make tokens and Improbable Alliance that makes tokens, but none of these are creatures. So you play Luca, you exile one of the tokens from, say, an Elspeth Sun's Nemesis or a Chandra Acolyte of Flame, and you immediately go fetch the only creature in your deck and raise Forerunners, which pumps all the tokens and attacks for victory. Is this deck actually good? I have no idea. It looks okay, but is it better than Fires of Invention? Maybe. It's a pretty explosive play, but I don't believe it's actually going to break the meta anytime soon. So until it proves that it can, I'm keeping Luca as a 0. Mythos of Vadrock is a sorcery, 5 damage divided any way you choose among creatures and planeswalkers. If you spend Jeskai, they can't attack, block, and abilities can't be activated. I think this is the worst Mythos. I'm not really sure how relevant that freezing ability is really going to be, as you really want to remove things permanently, so this goes in some kind of a tempo deck, but doesn't play well with a lot of the other Jeskai payoffs that we're going to get to that are very, very strong. So I have this rated as a 0, as I don't really see it making it into any decks. Unpredictable Cyclone. 3 red enchantment. If a cycling ability of another non-land card would cause you to draw a card, instead exile cards from the top of your library. Until you exile a card that shares a card type with the cycle card, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then put the exiled cards that weren't cast this way on the bottom of the library in a random order. So if you... Oh, it has cycling itself. So if you play the Cyclone and cycle another Cyclone, you might end up with a Shark Typhoon if that's in your deck. Same thing if you cycle the Shark Typhoon. But yeah, basically this and other cycling cards does some pretty nutty stuff for putting various permanents and onto the battlefield. And there are some cycling cards that can work with this. When I brew up the deck, does it look fun? Yeah. But I also think it looks like a meme and not very competitive. So if you like memeing, you probably want this card. I might be wrong about it being competitive, but it will have to prove itself. And in a world of Aethergust, I think the 5-mana enchantment is going to be a rare sight to see on the battlefield. Adhara the Wandering Monster is a red 5 legendary dino turtle with trample haste, cycling for 1 in a red. If you cycle this, whenever you cycle this, you don't put it in the graveyard, you shuffle it into your library. If you cycled it 4 times or more, you put it directly onto the battlefield. So do you want a sort of cheap 8/8 trample haste that also, I guess, drew you 4 cards over the course of spending 8 mana? Well, maybe this is for you. It reminds me of an old school grindy weird win con. And I don't think it's going to be tournament competitive because I think that the meta doesn't allow us to just sit there with 2 mana and cycle this over and over. Maybe a sideboard card for a control mirror where we're staring at each other with counterspells, but I still don't think that world exists anymore. I do think this card will be a ton of fun in the cycle deck, and it's definitely a craftable, nutty card. A little bit silly. We'll play plenty of decks with it. But as far as you spending your rare wild cards, I would not craft Adhara the Wandering Monster. Getting into green, we have another meme card, Colossification, which is 7 freaking mana for +20/+20, but when it enters the battlefield, you have to tap the enchanted creature. The instant kill is the, if you get this into the graveyard and you play Storm's Herald and you have Fling. So 5 mana with this in graveyard, and hopefully a Teferi on the board so the opponent can't ruin it for you. You just deal 23 to the face. Is that good? At some point, you know, some people will die to it, but in the long run, it's hard to see it being actually what the format is about. It's a little bit crazy. So I'm going to keep this at a 0, but it's definitely going to make up a few meme decks. But yeah, if you craft it, you'll probably be disappointed with the results in the long term. Gemraiser or Angurius Armored Killer. This is 3 in a green beast, but it has a mutate of 1 green. and it has Reach Trample. Whenever this creature mutates, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. This is, if you can mutate it onto something, whether that's an Arboreal Grazer or a Paradise Druid or whatever, then this is a much better Thrashing Brontodon. The 4/4 Reach Trample makes it for a good attacker and a good blocker, because each of those abilities works on one side or the other. And the ability to destroy the artifact or enchantment rather than have to sacrifice this like with Brontodon. That's a big deal. It's also a beast, which plays into some of the themes that we'll come across. There's a companion that wants all your creatures to be beasts. So I think this card is very good. I think that you can play it in a lot of decks. I think it's reasonable to get to spend 3 mana and mutate into a 4/4 Reach Trample. If the creature you mutate onto is already on the board at the start of the turn, like a Grazer, it can attack that turn, so it's almost like having haste. So I think this is a very good card, but I don't think it's a 4 of. I have this rated as a 2. I think it will be a good glue card for sideboards or main decks for green decks, anything with cheap creatures. And yeah, very happy to keep 2 of Gemrazor around. Kogla the Ape Titan is 3 green legendary ape. It's very expensive. King Kong himself. When the ape enters the battlefield, it fights a creature you don't control. Cool. When it attacks, destroy an artifact or enchantment the opponent controls. Cool. And for 1 and a green, return a human you control to its owner's hand. Kogla gains indestructible till end of turn. I think this text is sweet, and the ability to save Kogla in combat is nice, as well as reuse enter the battlefield abilities of cards like Charming Prince. But I don't think this text has to be an important part. I've had a few people while I'm brewing these decks say, how come you don't have any humans in your deck for Kogla? Don't add Kogla. I think that the juice of this card is in the enters the battlefield ability. The attack ability is nice, and this ability is kind of the extra, okay, maybe. This is a good 6 to fetch with Xanafer type effects, pod type effects, because we were kind of lacking a 6 with an enters the battlefield ability. And I think that there's a lot of room for this card to be one of in a number of different ramp and mid-range decks or sideboards. So I'm recommending crafting exactly 1 Kogla the Ape Titan. The Mythos of Brokos is the 2 green sorcery, but if Sultai is spent, you search your library for a card and you put it into your graveyard. Then you return 2 permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. Pretty interesting card for setting up 2-card combos, of which Sultai has a number of. Thassa and Agent of Treachery come to mind. Hydroid Krasis and Nissa come to mind. There's a lot of nice color pairs. You don't want to spend too much mana or too much time doing this. You pretty much want it for a very specific situation where you have a lot of mana so you can do something right away. You can also put Uro directly into your graveyard and put a Cavalier of Thorns in your hand to feed it, or a Tameo. So I think this card has a place, but I don't think you want very many. This is another one that I'm happy crafting exactly 1 copy of. Or if you open it from a pack, of course, you don't have to craft them at all. So 1 copy of Mythos of Brokos. Vivian Monster's Advocate. This is 5 mana, 3 green. And you may look at the top card of your library at any time. Static ability. You may cast creature spells. +1, make a 3/3 beast. It gets a counter for an ability, Vigilance, Reach, or Trample. -2, when you cast your next creature spell, search your library for a creature with lesser converted mana cost, put it onto the battlefield, shuffle your library. 3 loyalty. Yeah, I know she's not Nissa, but I don't think she's a bad card, and I think she can team up with Nissa to do some nutty things. For example, when you cast that Hydroid Krasis, and you -2 to search your library for another creature card and put it directly onto the battlefield, maybe you go find an Agent of Treachery. Or maybe you just get an Uro or a Cavalier of Thorns. But regardless, this card has a lot of power, and the ability to cast off the top of the library is basically green card advantage. It does protect itself. It has all the makings of a good Planeswalker, just not quite a broken one. So how many should you craft? I'm recommending 2. Because I think that in your Simic ramp shells, you're going to want 4 Nissas and 2 Vivians as a way to just continue snowballing that advantage. So there are other places where you can Vivian where you can't Nissa or wouldn't want to Nissa. Mono green, with a ton of creatures. Seems like it likes this Vivien as much as Vivien 4. Green-black kind of value mid-range might really like this Vivien more than Nissa. So there are places for this where the creature density is high and the card advantage is particularly valuable. But she's going to live in a shadow. Nissa's shadow is going to last at least a little while longer. 2 copies. We move into gold, the epic gold. Brokos Apex of Forever is a legendary Nightmare Beast elemental thingy with mutate with a bunch of funky mana symbols. I'm going to rely on you guys to read some of this yourself for a little while because there's just too much text. This has trample, it's a 6/6, and you may mutate it from the graveyard. So it's a free 5 mana 6/6 if it's in your graveyard and you have a creature to mutate onto, but that is really good. Giving trample to an Uro, giving an extra 6 points of power and toughness to your Hydroid Krasis, turning your mana dork or an Arboreal Grazer into a real card. It's pretty great if you can mill this, like say with a Cavalier of Thorns. So in the spirit of a free spell and a pretty cool mythic from the set, I recommend crafting 1, maximum 1. You only need 1, Brokos, Apex of Forever. Chevelle the Bane of Monsters is a legendary human rogue for a black and a green with a death touch wall of text. Basically, he's a bounty hunter. At the beginning of an upkeep, if your opponents control no permanents with bounty counters, you put a counter on a creature or planeswalker. So only one thing can be hunted at a time. Whenever a permanent an opponent controls with a bounty counter on it dies, you gain 3 life and you draw a card. So it's good if you have spot removal. I showed you Heartless Act. I showed you the mythos of whatever the Abzan thing is called. So if you have ways to reach out, target, and kill creatures, you can gain 3 life and draw cards. This card in your Golgari shell that doesn't have too many early drops, so you're willing to play this legendary human 1/3 death touch. It does help mitigate the fact that 1-for-1 removal is falling behind. Like this card and Murderous Rider really need to team up to offset that life loss and to get you further ahead when you play it. So I think that Chevelle has a home. The question is how many? And I think the right answer is 2. The legendariness, the lack of really an aggressive body but a decent defensive body. I think this card will mostly be a sideboard card because it's only really good against aggro. But I think 2 copies is the right number. So 2. 2 is the number of the crafting. Death's Oasis is an absolutely epic wall of text enchantment. White, Abzan. It costs Abzan. Green, white, black. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, put 2 cards from the library into graveyard. Return creature with lesser converted mana cost that died from your graveyard to the hand. 1, sack the Oasis, gain life, equal to the Gray's converted mana cost. It's a 3 mana do nothing enchantment. Now there are some memes, there's some silly stuff you can get into, but there's so much better stuff you can play, and Abzan is kind of a slow color combo as it is. So I don't trust this card. It's one of those cards that gets the brewing wheel spinning, but whenever my wheels start spinning on this card, I immediately say to myself, this is not worth it. So I'm recommending crafting 0 until somebody shows a way to make this card a little better than I think it is. Eerie Ultimatum is the first ultimatum that we're going to come to. And all the ultimatums are like 7 mana in a specific combination of colors for that particular shard. This is the Abzan ultimatum. It's a sorcery. When any number of permanent cards return any number of permanent cards with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this creates a scenario where you want a lot of individual cards to bring back with different names, and you want, when they come back, for it to be extremely powerful, if not just completely overwhelming on its own. Now, once again, you're an Abzan, so you don't have Growth Spiral or Uro. You don't have all of those like amazing Simic cards. So you need to make sure that you absolutely dominate after resolving the spell. So here's what I brewed up for the Eerie Ultimatum list. I call it Abzan Infinite Sadness because I just, after I brewed it, was like, this isn't quite it. But Elspeth Conquers Death is probably your best card. Nissa Who Shakes the World, Massacre Girl, Cavalier of Thorns to fill the graveyard, a few new cards like Skull Prophet to fill the graveyard and ramp as well. But yeah, we want to ramp and fill graveyard. We want to cast Eerie Ultimatum and get back a number of individual cards with different names, since that is what the Eerie thing does. Permanents with different names. So that's why you see the one Massacre Girl, the one Nissa, the one Knight of Autumn, the one Fabro Elder, the one Vraska, the one Apex of Death that we'll get to, an Ape Titan made the cut, Liliana, and Enray's Forerunners to just go smash their face. So this deck looks fun, but I can't imagine it being that competitive in a world with Gross Spiral and Aether Gust, so I had to dismiss it as probably just an awkward deck, and I'm not recommending crafting the Eerie Ultimatum at this time. However, if you want to be Abzan and you want a meme, you should go try it out. Speaking of other very expensive spells that I'm not recommending to craft, Emergent Ultimatum is Sultai. Search your library for up to 3 different mono-colored cards with different names and exile them. Few things. 1. Mono-colored cards. 2. Different names. Alright? I'm going to get a lot of recommendations for how to build an Emergent Ultimatum deck, and they're all going to have Casualties of War or something like that in them. That is not an acceptable grab. So easy to forget how this card works. I've found myself making this mistake a lot. An opponent chooses one of those cards, shuffle it into your library. You may cast the other cards without paying their mana costs, which is sweet. Exile Emergent Ultimatum. So you find 3 monocolored cards. You get to play 2 of them. You have to exile 1 of them. Some people see this and they think of an old card called Tooth and Nail, which just let you put together incredible combinations on the battlefield. And in another time, I think this card would be broken. And I have created a pretty sweet deck I can't wait to play, but I don't think it's good. I don't think it's actually going to set the meta on fire. But the idea of grabbing a combination along the lines of, say, Agent of Treachery, Enray's Forerunners, and Spark Double. Like, what does the opponent send back? If they send back the Forerunners, you get to Spark Double and Agent of Treachery. If they send back the Agent of Treachery, you get to Forerunner, Spark Double, and attack for 20. Or how about we grab Liliana, the Dreadhorde General, Planewide Celebration, and something else they just really don't want to deal with. I mean, if they don't get rid of the Celebration, if they actually give us Liliana and the Celebration, we get to proliferate and minus Liliana immediately. Insane. So, yeah, this looks very fun, but once again, I don't think it looks good. We'll see. I'm excited to play it, but I can't recommend crafting until this thing proves it's better than the Sultai list that we have access to already. Fiend Artisan is another interesting card for 2 hybrid Golgaris. This Nightmare gets +1/+1 for each card in your graveyard. You can sacrifice a creature for a pod effect. Search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, put it onto the battlefield, shuffle. Only when you can use a sorcery, which takes a lot of steam out of this card. I think this card is interesting and potentially very good, but I don't think it's a 4 of slam dunk. Because in Standard, I think it's going to be a little slow, and the ability won't ever really get activated because you're going to be too far behind. I think the best time for this card is when your graveyard already has multiple creatures. So following the Cavalier of Thorns, following using a Skull Prophet, a little later in the game. So like a turn 5 or 6 play, but that could come down on turn 1 if you needed it to. It's good with Mutate because it keeps this ability if you put it on the bottom, and it keeps giving +1/+1 for each card in your graveyard to the creature you mutated onto it. It's good for Devotion, such as Black Devotion, because this counts as 2 black pips. So the card's not bad, but I don't think it's great. So as a Mythic, I'm recommending crafting 2. It slots into a number of decks in a number of interesting ways, but I don't think it makes your deck dramatically better on its own. Frondland Felidar is 4 mana, 3/5 Vigilant, Cat Beast. Creatures with Vigilance have 1 tap target creature. It's a good way to make your Vigilance creatures hard to block. but that's just not a rate I'm willing to pay in Constructed, and while it might be a limited bomb for the Vigilance mechanic being a bit pushed, it's definitely not an important card for Constructed. 0 is the number. General Kudro is your human lord. For 1 white and a black, other humans get +1/+1. When the General Kudro of Dranith or another human enters the battlefield, exile a card from a graveyard. Take that Uro, take that Kroxa. Sacrifice 2 humans for 2 mana, destroy a creature with power 4 or greater. This card has a lot of text, and they're trying to make the human tribe a little competitive against all these frickin' mutants, because remember, mutate says non-human, so you can't run humans in almost any other deck, so it makes sense to also push the human tribe a little. Is it good? Abzan humans looks particularly bad. Mardu humans looks much more playable, and of course, you still need a way to win though. It's awkward because you have all of these sweet cards, but you have no good 1-drops, and you have pretty rough mana, because as we'll get to, the tricolored lands enter the battlefield tapped, so you really don't want to play 1-drops in your deck. So what do you do when you have a bunch of 2-drops and 3-drops? Well, you have to close the game somehow, so you Embercleave. This deck also has a number of other cards that we haven't talked about yet, but obviously Hero Precinct 1 makes human tokens when you cast a multicolored spell. Pairs up pretty well with the General. I just don't think humans can play a mid-range game against Nissa Who Shakes the World, which is a card I know I mention a lot, but it's true. I don't think they play a good mid-range game against Embercleave either. So they have to end the game at speed themselves, which to me, the only card I could find that really did the job was, yeah, Embercleave. So I think this card in this deck is interesting, but I don't think it's amazing. And I'm recommending crafting 3 of these if you want to play humans, but if you skip this, I won't blame you, because I don't think this has the makings of a meta-defining deck. Maybe I'll change my mind when I play with it or see some different builds. It says, look at the top 5 of your library, put any number of permanent cards from among them onto the battlefield, the rest into your hand, exile the Ultimatum. It's a pretty sweet card, but it is 7 mana. It is crazy expensive. I'm recommending 1 of this card. There are fun things you can do, of course. This with repeated reverberation would be nuts. Raw, ways to copy it. But for the most part, I think it's just an over-the-top value kind of play. And I don't think you need much of it. I'm recommending 1 of it for the Go Big Teamer Elemental kind of ramp decks, and I don't think you'll need more. I think 1 is the perfect number. Gyruda, the Doom of Depths, is a companion. So this is 4 and a hybrid Dimir for a Demon Kraken. The companion cost of this card is that the starting deck contains only cards with even converted mana costs. If it is, you may cast it from outside the game. So you get this kind of as a one-shot commander for that you brawl players and such if you meet this deck building cost, which only evens is kind of a strict cost. But when it enters the battlefield, each player mills their top 4. You grab a creature from among those 8 milled cards, your opponent's and your own. You grab a creature with an even converted mana cost and you put it onto the battlefield. So that's a pretty cool ability and might be worth exploiting. I only recommend crafting 1 so that you can try out the companion thing in a number of different colors. An interesting thing about brewing in this format is nearly every deck has a companion version that you could run. So as I was making a deck, I was like, ooh, I could run it with this companion, and then I pay this deck building cost for a free card. It's just really interesting. Companion as an ability is something I'm worried about, to be honest, because some of the costs are really low. This is not one of them. This is a pretty high cost. You lose out on a lot of good cards. I don't want to play my Esper deck without Teferi, but you got to if you're going to run this. And there's some sweet memes that you can do. So I threw in a total meme deck that actually uses 4 of this card. But here's a list where the idea is to cast the Gyruda, and then if the trigger of milling 4 also hits another Gyruda, or a Spark Double, or a Charming Prince, you get to or a Thassa, you get to keep repeating the process. And if you completely mill yourself out and you Thassa's Oracle, you win. Or you might mill your opponent out in the process, depending how many cards they're drawing during their turn, and if you hit them with a Wall of Lost Thoughts. It sounds like a good, proper, silly deck that I'll probably play at some point, but I'm not recommending crafting 4 of these because I don't think it's good. King Ghidra, the Luna Apex of Wishes. This is an elemental beast dinosaur, so types. It mutates for 6-ish teamer, but its cost is 5-ish teamer for 6/6 flying trample. That on its own doesn't really do it, but whenever this creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library till you exile a non-land permanent card, put it onto the battlefield or into your hand. So this card is frickin' sweet in that way that it kind of draws a card, but the card might be free and go directly to the battlefield. If you reveal an Agent of Treachery, it goes straight down, and that's kind of the dream. I will probably brew around 4 of this card at multiple points in Standard, but I don't think it's really where you want to be all the time in the current Standard, because it's just kind of, it sounds like it's a cool ability, but it's kind of fair compared to what other decks can do and the nutty things that are going on. So I have this as a 1. I think that that's the safe craft, especially for a Mythic. I think you'll want to run it in your Elemental deck and your Mutate deck, and that will be good. But I wouldn't go hard on this with your Mythics, because I don't think in the long run this is what the format is about. I think Inspired Ultimatum is the best ultimatum. This is the Jeskai Ultimatum, where target player gains 5 life, it deals 5 damage to any target, and you draw 5 cards. Maybe it's the control player in me, but I see that, and I see it gives you the time to use those cards by gaining life. It removes something from the battlefield to help you stabilize. And it also plays really well with a few cards that are going to come up later that reward you for playing expensive sorceries. You also have Teferi in these colors, so you might get to play this at instant speed, as opposed to being stuck playing it at sorcery speed. And Teferi can help make sure it resolves, because, newsflash, every single ultimatum has a color that can get Aether Gusted. Wah, wah, wow. I have a soundboard. I felt like a verbalizing of that would be a little more potent. But I think that Inspired Ultimatum is a legit card, and I'm recommending crafting 2 copies because I'm really going to enjoy this as a high-end control play. Giganta the Wellspring is a commander that... See, I did it! Is a companion, and this companion has the cost that no starting card in your deck has more than one of the same mana symbol. So what does that mean? Well, think about Niv Mizzet Reborn, right? It's a different mana symbol all the way across. Now compare that to Cavalier of Thorns. It has green, green, green. You could play Niv Mizzet Reborn and have this as your companion. You could not play Cavalier of Thorns. So you can't play this with your companion and have Nissa who shakes the world in your deck because there's 2 green mana sources in the cost. I hope that helps visualize. This is a 5 mana 5/5 that taps for Wooburg, 5 mana, but the mana can't be spent to pay generic mana costs. So if you tap this, you're say activating, I don't know. My brain is farting on this one. You can use this mana to pay the first 5 mana of Golis's trigger, for example, but you can't use it to pay the 2. I guess. But anyway, this card is definitely a companion cost that isn't unreasonable. There are a number of decks that you can build that satisfy this cost. So you get to run this kind of for free in a number of those decks. So I recommend crafting 1 Giganta the Wellspring, and I'll show you a deck that I brewed around Giganta really quickly. And this is a Fires of Invention Golos deck, as well as a Kenrith the Returned King deck, because using that mana for Golos or Kenrith is awesome. It's also a Niv Mizzet Reborn Fires of Invention deck. As you see, none of the cards in the deck share a mana symbol in their casting cost, and it's still a very powerful deck with a number of great effects. Even Carnival Carnage, if you look at the mana symbols, there's hybrid, there's black, and there's red, so they're all different. To my knowledge, this means I can run this card. We'll find out if I'm wrong on Wednesday, I suppose. Or you can call up a judge right now. Kruga the Macro Sage is a companion that is a Hybrid Simic 3 Dino Hippo. This one says your starting deck contains only cards with converted mana cost 3 or greater, and land cards. So when I first saw this card, by the way, it's a 5/4 that when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card for each permanent you control with mana cost 3 or greater. I saw this and I was like, huh, so you don't get to play any 1-drops or 2-drops. It may as well say companion. As long as you concede the game before it even starts, this can be your companion. So I thought this was a really bad card. Then I remembered there's a deck that just doesn't care about this whatsoever. So if you want to craft exactly like 1 or 2, like just a couple of cards from this set and still be super competitive, first of all, you could keep playing mono red, who gets nothing from this set. Or you can play this deck, Fires of Invention, which, as you can see, has no 1-drops and no 2-drops, but still gets to run Bone Crusher Giant. It runs sweepers like Clarion to keep the board clear, and Teferi. It has the Sphinx of Foresight. I am recommending trying out Narset of the Ancient Way, but this could just as easily be Cavalier of Gales, which is what it replaced. Elspeth Conquers Death, Cav of Flame, Canlith. You've seen it all before. But now your Fires deck has a guaranteed turn 5 play that draws more cards to make it more consistent. Easy. So original, so brilliant. But yeah, Karuga, just craft 1 for your Fires deck and call it a day. Kahira the Orphan Guard is another companion, which once again I'm going to recommend that you craft exactly 1 of to try the companion ability. This requires all your creatures to be cats, elementals, nightmares, dinosaurs, or beasts. It has vigilance. Each other creature you control that is a cat, elemental, nightmare, or dinosaur or beast gets +1/+1 and has vigilance. So it's a tribal one. You can brew it in a number of tribal ways. And since a lot of the mutants in this set have a lot of these abilities, it probably fits well in a mutate deck. Although some of the good mutate targets may not fit in. Although I think a Boreal Grazer is inexplicably a beast. So craft 1 and look for the decks where you can fit this in, especially you tribal fans. The Bhandar Prodigy is an interesting card for sure. It's a green-blue mythic legendary human druid. When you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of any type that permanent produced, and for 7 mana, look at your top 5. You may put a non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield. So you want to play this with a bunch of creatures, a bunch of mana creatures. You want to play this with creatures that you want to tutor up for 7 mana or more, like Endrace Forerunners and Agent of Treachery. I think this can be an interesting Simic creature ramp card, but I don't think it's necessarily better than existing Sultai, Bant, and Simic decks. So I'm not recommending crafting this card. I think somebody has to show me that that deck is better than what we can already do, and that deck is definitely more susceptible to wraths because you're playing out multiple creatures to produce mana. You could play artifacts that produce mana. This also works well with treasures, no, it is treasure that sack for mana. Gold tokens from the first Iroan games. It plays well with those things, but I don't think that's good enough. So I'm not recommending crafting this card for now, and we'll see if it can break some deck and it's stronger than I think or not. Labyrinth Raptor adds to a legacy of Rakdos 2-drops that are good, but I don't think this is as good as the others. It is a Menace 2/2 with the ability for a Rakdos to pump other creatures with Menace, and whenever a creature with Menace becomes blocked, the defending player sacrifices a creature blocking it. I think this is going to be a nightmare in limited. Haha, get it? It's a nightmare. But I think it's not a constructed playable card. What would you play this instead of in your Rakdos deck? Would you cut Robber of the Rich? Would you cut Dreadhorde Butcher, Priest of the Forgotten Gods, Stormfist Crusader? I just don't think this makes it. 0 copies. Lloris of the Dream Den is a companion that's received a ton of hype. It says each permanent card in your starting deck has converted mana cost 2 or less, lifelink, 3 mana in black or white, and during each of your turns, you may cast 1 permanent spell with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard. It's a 3/2. In older formats, this card is busted. In Standard, playing such a low-to-the-ground deck can come with extreme cost, but a lot of people, I think, are going to gravitate to this card anyway, both as a companion and in your regular deck. I don't think it's good enough to just be a 4 of or even a 3 of in your main deck, so I'm only recommending crafting one, but there's still a number of things you can do with this as a companion. For example, just play white aggro. Look at how many 1-drops white aggro actually has. I built a 100 card deck with almost all 1 and 2 drops, and then I had to scale it all the way back, which is absolutely nutty to me. But you get a free 3-mana 3/2 that lets you cast cards out of your graveyard every turn, and you get Unbreakable Formation because only permanent cards count towards the companion cost. So, yeah. I think plenty of people are just going to want to get in there with a deck like this, so I expect to see a lot of Lloris, the Dream Den, in Standard. Lutri the Spell Chaser, on the other hand, I don't expect to see as a companion very often because the starting cost is that each card in your deck has a different name. You have to play a singleton deck, the opponent gets to play up to 4 of things. That's not good for you. Flash, though, hybrid Izzet, and 1, and a hybrid Izzet. It's a 3/2, decent body, and when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you copy an instant or sorcery spell that you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. I was excited about this card copying shocks and ops and get you little pieces of value. Then they spoiled the ultimatums, which you can straight up copy with this card. You can also copy a giant explosion, because unlike expansion, the cost of copying something at a 4 or less doesn't exist. So, Lutri is a companion that I don't think will be played as a companion, but I think it will be played as an, I have a recommendation on 2, but I think you just play this in your deck. You can just flash this in your deck. It can attack down a Narset, get you a little value by copying things. I think it's just good in Izzet Flash, or Mono Blue Flash, perhaps. So, I'm recommending 2 copies of Lutri the Spell Chaser. The legendariness gives it diminishing returns, and by the way, as you can see, before the card was even released, it's already been banned in Brawl and banned in Commander, because the cost is, frankly, just free. Those are singleton formats, so this would be your companion in every single Izzet deck ever, and why wouldn't you? So, already banned. Too OP. Oh, by the way, a quick look at my Lutri Spell Chaser recommendation for Izzet. Tempo, we see some cards sneaking in there like Vicious Great Shark. I actually think Sprite Dragon is a card that will make an impact with a Flying Haste. You cast a non-creature, you put a counter on it. A very aggressive little card that I think will do very well, and goes well with Sea-Octopus for sure. So this is an example of an Izzet Tempo deck that can make some use from Lutri, the Spell Chaser. Narset of the Ancient Way. I'm very excited about this card. This is Jeskai and a colorless. For a +1, you gain 2 life. You add blue, red, or white, and this mana can only cast a non-creature spell. I'm just going to put it out there right now. Good color fixing to cast your Jeskai Ultimatum. Then the -2 is you draw a card, then you may discard a card. When you discard a non-land card in this way, you deal damage equal to the card's converted mana cost to target creature or planeswalker. So if you discard a very large cycling card, you can just kill a Nissa with this card. Like, just reach out and kill that Nissa. I love this idea. I love the ability to hit planeswalkers. In my opinion, there should have been so many cards when War of the Spark came out that could also deal damage to planeswalkers, and I think this is a very good one that we needed. The -6 is an emblem that lets you cast Shock whenever you cast a non-creature spell. It's a win con. It's a slow, dirtily win con, but it is a win con. It's fine. The emblem, I think, will happen here and there, and you can emblem it quickly. It comes out at 4, it goes to 5, then it goes to 6. So it can emblem only 2 turns after you play it if it's not under pressure. I think Narset is very good. I'm not sure that Narset is great. It does depend on having something that you're willing to discard, which makes me more likely to play with expensive cards, like Jeskai Ultimatum. So, I think Narset is a good glue card for a lot of these Jeskai decks, but I don't think Narset is broken. Still, as a fan of this style of play, I'm recommending crafting 3 copies of Narset of the Ancient Way, because I have optimism that this will be useful in a number of different Jeskai strategies for some time. I think I brewed up, I think the one I have here is, Jeskai Super Friends. As you know, I got to Mythic last month with a Jeskai Super Friends deck that would have loved to play with Narset of the Ancient Way. And you can also run other expensive cards so that Narset's minus is better than you thought it would be. Inspired Ultimatum, of course, is a good one, but Boon of the Wishgiver is a sorcery that draws 4 cards and cycles for 1. So it's a low opportunity cost, and it's a good discard to Narset. Same with Shark Typhoon. Very high mana cost on this, but you could cycle it or you could discard it to Narset. So I'm excited to try out this deck. Like, really excited to try out this deck. Jeskai Control might be back on the menu. Nahiri, the Apex of Death, is a mythic rare that it costs 5 for Abzan for a Death Touch lifelink, but it mutates for 7. And whenever it mutates, return any number of creature cards with total power 10 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. I am looking forward to meming this with those 0-cost cards like Stonecoil Serpent and Midnight Reaper to draw a bunch of cards, and maybe Cruel Celibate to drain the opponent for a bunch. I think we've all seen that silly deck. This looks like it might be a nice hammer blow for that deck, but that doesn't make it good, and it's mythic. So I think it's too slow. I think 7 is too much. I think the setup cost of having cards in the graveyard is too iffy. So I'm recommending crafting 0 of Nithori, the Apex of Death. Obosh, the Prey Piercer, is another companion. This one requires all of the cards in your deck to be odd, and if a source with an odd converted mana cost would deal damage to a permanent or a player, it deals double that damage. Similar to the Broodmoth, to make this deck good, we need to set it up so that the opponent takes a bunch of damage on the turn you play this for 5. You don't want to be forced to untap with this to make this good. So setups with Witch's Oven and Mayhem Devil definitely stand out to me as the best way to play the Prey Piercer. So I'm recommending crafting 1, again for those companion E reasons, and this is what the Rakdos deck might look like if you were forced to only play odd cards. I think Footlight Fiend is a nice little addition to the deck because it's another way to get some extra damage in, but I'm really not sure if this version is going to be better than the other Rakdos deck, and I'm not sure that I would actually recommend it over the other. Probably not. Priest of the Forgotten Gods is a big loss to the deck. But still, it's worth playing with, and I think that the companions in general add such a new dimension to the game that we should play them a little bit and find out what's up with them. So, crafting 1, I think you definitely should. Offsprings Revenge is cute and adorable, and a meme. It is a 5 mana enchantment, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, exile a red, white, or black creature card, create a token that's a copy of the card, except it's 1/1, it gains haste until end of turn. So, hilarious with Dracoseth, as you immediately get to attack with a 1/1 that still gets the attack trigger and breathes all that fire. But I mean, you know, if I'm going to be hard on Outlaw's Merriment, I'm going to be hard on this card. I think it's better than Outlaw's Merriment. That's not saying much. Recommended craft 0. Quartzwood Crasher is a 5 mana 6/6 trample with kind of a trample tribal ability of whenever one or more creatures with trample deal damage to a player, create an XX green dinosaur beast creature token with trample. X is the amount of damage those creatures dealt to the player. So, very fun card. I can't wait to play this with Perforos and make all kinds of giant dinos, but that deck is kind of a one-shot kill anyway. So, when they talk about win more, I think we're winning more. It's a 5 mana 6/6. I think that's too slow for standard, even with a sweet ability. I'm recommending crafting 0 Quartzwood Crashers, but I am going to enjoy throwing this into my Historic Brawl Dinosaur deck. Rial the Everwise. This card has a lot of possibility. It's a mythic. It is it in 1. Human Wizard, +1/+0 for an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. Whenever you discard one or more cards for the first time each turn, draw that many cards. Pretty good with cycling because you get to draw 2 cards after cycling 1 thing. Cathartic Reunion is back in the set. Cathartic Reunion is a 2-mana draw, like discard 2, draw 5 with this card. I think that the mistake most people want to make is to build around this by crafting 4 of them. You run this out on turn 3, you hope it lives or isn't bounced by Teferi, and then you untap and go nuts. I don't think that's a good play pattern for current standard. I think that where you want this card is when you have 5 or 6 mana available, you want to play this card, and you want to play a card like Cathartic Reunion on the same turn to generate a ton of value. Then the opponent has to deal with the Real because it's probably getting to be a powerful threat from having a stocked graveyard. And even if they deal with it, you already generated a ton of advantage to rebuild and come at them again with some other line of aggression. So I think that 2 is the right number to craft. I think you can build around this card plenty. You could go Mimi with, what is that card? Heroic Redemption or something? The Gideon card? Heartwarming Reunion? I don't know. Heartwarming Redemption? These meme cards, I don't understand. So you could build all in on this card, but being mythic, I wouldn't make you craft it for a meme that's not going to work out for very long or be very fun once you start losing and the shine wears off. So I think crafting 2 of this will let you build the Izzet decks that you want to build and get a lot of the fun that you want to get. And here is my, if you wanted it, my Everwise Arclight Phoenix deck to see if Arclight Phoenix can finally be good again. The odds are not really, but you can definitely do fun stuff here with Sprite Dragon, Arclight Phoenix, and Everwise, and Cathartic Reunion. Ruinous Ultimatum. This is a card that if you want a wish board for your Fae of Wishes, you should craft 1. It is the Mardu Ultimatum that destroys all non-land permanents your opponents control. Epic planar cleansing that is one-sided. Frickin' sweet. And if you are playing Fires of Invention, you use your Fae of Wishes, you go fetch this, you blow everything up. Easy peasy. Craft 1. Skycat Sovereign seems like an obligatory print to keep trying to make blue-white flyers a thing. This is Azorius for an elemental cat that gets +1/+1 for each other creature with flying that you control, and for 4 mana makes a 1/1 catbird token, because apparently having catbirds is fine now. If you are the person who plays blue-white flyers, you should have 4 of this, because they are not legendary, they play well together, you always want one, and it is perfect for that deck. If you play other decks that aren't that deck, you shouldn't craft this card because I don't think it's good in any other deck, specifically at this time. Maybe I'll turn out to be wrong in some way, but I would only grab this if you really love Azorius Flyers. Personally, I don't love that deck. I don't think that deck is very good. I will craft 0. Slitherwisp, on the other hand, is a elemental nightmare for black-black-blue. This is a flash, and whenever you cast another spell with flash, you draw a card and each opponent loses 1 life, and it's a 3/2. There are so many cards in Standard and from this set specifically with flash, but this is kind of a flash lord that pushes it all extremely hard. And while you might want to play this on turn 3 and just be very aggressive in some matchups, there are plenty of other matchups where you play this on turn 5 or 6, and then you play another flash card and draw a card, and another flash card and draw another card, and you drain the opponent. I mean, when I first read this, I thought it must say that you lose 1 life. Like, shouldn't I pay 1 life when I'm drawing cards this easily? But no, it's the opponent. Like, it's a powerful tempo play on its own. It gets that extra damage in, even with a Spectral Sailor. I think this card is nuts, and I think that the way that they push Flash in this set, it's very strong. It is pretty easy to block, because despite feeling like a nightmare might have flying, it doesn't. So you need to be able to kill the opponent's blockers, but there's a lot of spot removal, such as Heartless Act, that got printed for this set. So I am high on Slitherwisp and the Dimir Flash deck I showed before, and I recommend 4 copies if this is your jam. Apex... Sorry, I was going to say Apex of the Snap decks of the Hunt, but this is Snap deck's Apex of the Hunt. And this is a Mardu and a 1 Dino Cat that mutates for some kind of Mardu. But it's worth noting this little hybrid symbol in the middle, because it means that you could play this in Boros, or you could play this in Orzhov. You don't have to play full Mardu to pay the mutate cost. And it's a double striker, it's a 3/5. And whenever it mutates, it does 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker, and you gain 4 life. So again, please remember, mutate triggers not just when you put this card on the battlefield, but also when you mutate something onto it, another mutate card. So I think this card has potential and a lot of strength. I think it's good. It's like a mid-range card that is good against aggro. It's a mid-range card that isn't good against ramp or control. So I think it has a place. And the place that I brewed up for it goes with another mutate card that's coming up, which is like a Jeskai tokens kind of list, which you can run it in because of that hybrid mutate cost like I mentioned. There's a few cards in here you haven't seen yet. I'll get to it more when we talk about Vadrix, because that's much more of the key card. But I see this card as very playable. I'm recommending crafting 2, because I think it's good for some things and bad for others, and I wouldn't be surprised if its proper home is a sideboard for the foreseeable future. Song of Creation is a Temur and 1 enchantment that lets you play an additional land on each of your turns, and whenever you cast a spell, draw 2 cards. We're off to a good start. At the beginning of your end step, discard your hand. Aww, so sad. But I think this card is pretty nuts, and the amount of combos and silly things you can get up to it, I think this card is going to be a really fun card. And if you are a brewer who wants there to be combo in Standard, then you very, very much want to craft 4 of these cards. Temur Adventure can use it because if you send things to the Adventure Zone, then they're outside your hand, so you have a way to cast them at the start of the next turn to jumpstart the card drawing engine again. But I think some of the neatest things you can do with Song of Creation are these. Teferi's Time Twist, exile it, so it comes into play at the beginning of your end step, but it misses the opportunity to put that trigger on the stack, so you get to keep your hand. So imagine turn 5, you cast Song of Creation, you play your extra land, you play Teferi's Time Twist, you draw 2 cards, you exile Song of Creation, and then Song of Creation returns to the battlefield, and it's already on the battlefield at the beginning of your next turn, and you have the cards you drew from the Time Twist, so now you can start going off and doing nutty things. Another one, we've already been main decking Aether Gust in this format. Well, now there's a good reason to main deck Aether Gust. Not only is it good against your opponent's best cards, you can put Song of Creation on top of your library to avoid the discarding of your hand. Both of these, I think, make for pretty nuts interactions with the Song, and they let me push a combo deck, which pushes Uro forward, but actually wins with Underworld Breach and Thassa's Oracle, because once you have enough land, and you can cast a ton of spells and use Underworld Breach and Merfolk Secret Keeper to mill yourself, as well as drawing cards, you can deck yourself really fast. So this is my Underworld Breach, Thassa's Oracle, Song of Creation combo deck, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm not sure what competitive looks like and how easy it will be to interact with. It might be that we want white in this deck for Teferi so that the opponent can't ruin our key turn when we try to cast Oracle or go off with the Song. Teferi, by the way, also plays well with Song of Creation. You can bounce it and have it for next turn. So I love Song of Creation. If you like brewing combo decks, I think you should craft 4, and this will entertain you for most of the format. From the highest highs to the lowest lows, some people are excited about this card. This is Titan's Nest. It's Sultai and a 1 enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may look at the top card of your library and you may put it into your graveyard. Exile a card from your graveyard for a colorless mana. Spend this only to cast a colorless spell without X in its mana cost. So it can't power, you can use this as many times as you want a turn, but it can't power up X spells. It's only colorless mana, so it can only pay like the generic costs. I don't think this card is good. The brews I've tried to make with it look really clunky. It's hard to do anything with it the turn you play it because you need the colored mana. So I currently have this as a 0. I would love to be surprised and have this be a better brewer card than I expected. So by all means, go brew with this card and surprise me if it speaks to you. Mori the Collector. This is one I currently have as a 0 because I think that all creature decks or all artifact decks or something like that are bad. I forgot to read the card though. hybrids black and green, and 2, each non-land card in your deck shares a card type companion. So you have to have all creatures, or all artifacts, or all enchantments. And when it enters the battlefield, you choose a card type, and those spells cost 1 less to cast. If this costs 3, I would think it would be really, really nuts. The 4/5 isn't bad either. But overall, I don't think this is the kind of free card you want that starting from turn 5 onward gives you a cost reduction, because I don't think you can abuse it too well. There's a few decks I've brewed with Umori. For example, I actually don't have it right here, but there's a few spots where I think this card can be good. I'm just not feeling it though. All those decks don't inspire me. If you have any desire to run a deck like this, go ahead and craft it. It's not a high cost, but it's not for me. The Apex of Thunder, Vidrock. Jeskai for 3/3, flying first strike, elemental Dino Cat. But the mutate with the hybrid of the blue and the white and the red lets you cast a non-creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its cost. This was a tough card to evaluate and brew a deck for, because on one hand, when you mutate into play, you can copy a Teferi and cast it for free, like from your graveyard. I said copy, but I hope you get what I mean. But you need a creature to mutate it onto, so you need to play this weird combination of creatures and non-creature spells. So one thing that I came up with that I'm really excited to try out is what I call Jeskai tokens, which I showed you briefly before, because you can't mutate onto a human, but if your token creates something else besides a human, then you get to do really cool stuff. Raise the Alarm creates soldiers, not humans apparently. Forbidden Friendship creates a dinosaur and a human. So you can mutate the Vidrock onto it, you can mutate the Snap decks onto it, etc., etc. This is also a companion deck because Kahira sees that the creatures we have in the deck are either cats, elementals, nightmares, dinosaurs, or beasts. There's actually not many creatures in the deck at all. Lord Dracus is another mutate card, which goes well with other mutate cards as we've discussed. That also returns instants or sorceries to your hand. But for this deck, the idea is you play something like Raise the Alarm, then maybe a Teferi, and then you play Vidrock mutating onto one of the tokens, recasting the Raise the Alarm so you make even more tokens. The next turn you can cast Unbreakable Formation and mutate a Lord Dracus onto the Vidrock mutate thing, getting back the Unbreakable Formation so that you have it to cast next turn, and you can use the Vidrock to cast the Raise the Alarm from the graveyard again. They don't exile these spells after they're cast, you guys. They keep going back to the graveyard. So the board gets wider and wider. The Unbreakable Formation makes them taller and taller. It sounds like a pretty fun deck that probably won't work, but it's worth a shot, and I really want to try it out. I haven't seen this brew elsewhere, so it's kind of my baby, and I'm curious to see if it's playable. Come find out on Wednesday for the early access event sponsored Wizards of the Coast, #ad sponsored, #ad. I'm recommending 3, by the way, on the Apex of Thunder. It looks like a pretty amazing and fun card that's right in my alley and in colors I like, so maybe you will too. Don't craft it if you're not willing to really work and tweak the deck. It may turn out, of all the cards, this one might be a bust or it might be a bomb. Whirlwind of Thought. This is a 4-mana enchantment that whenever you cast a non-creature spell, draw a card. Unlike the Song of Creation, this doesn't do anything the turn it enters the battlefield, and it doesn't have, in my opinion, nearly as strong an effect. If you have a way to cheat this onto the battlefield, maybe it's good, but I don't want to spend my turn 4 resolving something that doesn't do anything. Outlaw's Merriment, for example. The ability is nice, but I think it's just too easy for the opponent to wreck you with an Elspeth Conquers Death, a Teferi, Time Raveler, or just beat you to death with an Embercleave when you tap out for this card. So, I'm not a believer yet. I am recommending 0 copies. Joiner of Forces. Winota Joiner of Forces is a 2 red-white Boros thingy, legendary human warrior, 4/4. Whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, you may look at the top 6 cards of your library. This triggers for each attacking non-human, by the way. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible, with the rest on the bottom in a random order. So, This is a hard card to evaluate and brew around. I have not found the sauce yet. I wanted to build a deck with Raise the Alarm and Chandra Acolyte of Flame to make a bunch of tokens that when you play Winota on turn 4 and attack with those tokens, it triggers Winota like 4 times. And then the human that you have in your deck is like 4 Agents of Treachery. So you just go through, grab agents, and grab their best things. That sounds really fun. I think it's asking too much. I'm not sure if it's asking more or less than my Jeskai tokens deck. So I don't know. I currently have this as a 0 because to me, I can't find a combination of cards that makes it good. It's awkward to get a lot of non-humans and humans into the same deck. Somebody else might find the perfect mix, and then this card might be really good, like competitive good, and I will look bad. But since I didn't find it yet, I currently have this as a 0. I think there's a good potential that crafting, if I were to tell you this card is broken, craft 3 or 4 of this, and then it turns out you just can't get that mix, you know, I'd feel bad, and that would be a bad waste of your wild card. So I'm in wait and see mode on Winota with the caveat that I might have missed this one, you guys. This might be a lot better than I think. If you have a list for this card that you think is busted, post it, please, in comments. I would appreciate it. Your Eye on the Sky Nomad is the commander that we alluded to much like a million hours ago earlier in the video that says your starting deck contains at least 20 cards more than the minimum deck. Well, if you watched yesterday's video, you know I played a 250 card Simic deck. It's not that hard in the current standard to build your deck a little bigger to get this free effect. And the effect is good. A flying 4/5 is fine, but when it enters the battlefield, exile any number of non-land permanents, return them to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. So you get a Charming Prince effect for all your non-land permanents. So it can blink Agent of Treachery, of course, which you're all thinking of, or a Fibblefib or Elite Guard Mage that you have sitting around. That's all good. It can blink Elspeth Conquers Death and get the first trigger again. That is freaking crazy. So I think this card is definitely worth putting into decks, and the fact that it's hybrid, the hybrid blue-blue especially, means that you can play it in Simic decks. So Temur Elementals, where you get more triggers on your Risen Reefs, and you have Thassa Agent in there anyway, why not play 80 cards in a Sky Nomad? Oh my gosh. So I think this card is really good, and you should craft one. You OCD types, though, you might have to play 80 card decks. You know, be safe out there. Don't let your brains explode. Don't literally go insane because you have more than 60 cards in your deck, you OCD types. Godzilla, the King of the Monsters. I love the art. I'm going to play this card. I'm going to craft this card. It's buy a box. You can't get it from a pack. It's like Kenrith the Return King. You have to spend a wild card on it, and you shouldn't because it's bad. It's not bad. It's just not good. 7/3 and lethal damage dealt to creatures you control is determined by power rather than toughness. It's a unique effect. It's shiny. It's cool art. It has trample. But 5 mana for Big Dork, as we've established many other times in this review, is not constructed competitive. So if you care about your wild cards and getting a long way with them and playing competitive Magic in any way, or just caring about your win-loss record, don't craft this card. Those Mythics are hard to come by. It's not worth 30 packs. It's just not. Zerda the Dawn Waker. I have this as the companion in my cycling deck. It says each permanent card, don't forget that, you can run instants and sorceries, but each permanent card in your starting deck has an activated ability. Planeswalkers have activated abilities, at least all the Planeswalkers so far. It says whenever you activate something that isn't a mana cost, it's 2 less to activate, but the cost can't reduce the effect to less than 1. So if it's cycling 2 or cycling 3, now it only costs cycling 1. And that's nice. So this is particularly effective in the cycling deck. It has this weird activated ability, because if it didn't, it would be a hypocrite. 1 and a tap, a creature can't block this turn, which, nah. I don't know if that's ever good. 3/3. It's fine. And like most companions, it's a free card. I'm going to play it in my cycling deck. There are probably Super Friends decks that just run Planeswalkers and Sweepers that can play this card because all their permanents are Planeswalkers, so it's free. So you may as well craft one. Why the heck not? We did it! We made it through colorless. We're in the end. We're approaching the finish line. Bhandhar's Enclave. 3 tap, draw a card. Use this ability only if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Tap for colorless. People tend to overvalue these. This is pretty close to a win more. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you should be ahead and you should be finding ways to press that. But sometimes you just run out of things and you need to draw, so it's fine. But for example, if you just cast a Hydroid Krasis, are you going to use this to draw an extra card? There are places where you might want to, but don't craft 4 of this card. Don't run 3 of this card. I think this card is an easy one of, and the only places I would run more, maybe Mono Green Stompy wants a couple more, because that deck is often in danger of getting into a board stall. So, yeah, for me, this is a Mono Green Stompy type card, and maybe a one of in Simic Ramp, and not much more. Crystalline Giant is a fun card with a million words. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you get a random from all this crap counter. This and the Ozolith, the next 2 cards, I'm going to have to defend myself because those look like they could be a deck, but I think that deck looks terrible. But I have a 0 on Crystalline Giant because you don't know what you're going to get, and there's so many ways that this is a bad limited card. If you pay 3 mana for a 3/3 Menace, like, you what are you doing? A 3/3 Reach? It's just a 3/3 Vigilance. It's just bad. So yeah, I'm not going to craft any Crystalline Giants, and I'm not going to craft any of the Ozolith, which might be the most overhyped card in the set. I would love it if you break it for me. 1 legendary artifact. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if it has counters on it, you may move them to a creature. 1 mana is a low opportunity cost, but as a card that does nothing on its own, I don't think that's particularly useful. I do, however, think that this is going to be really popular with the casual crowd, as evidenced by all the people who have already sent me hate mail that I couldn't fall instantly in love with the Ozolith, and the very first person who spoiled this for me on Twitch sent me the link to it, preceded it with, "This is the most broken card of the decade." Okay, prove it. Because I have this as a 0, because I don't even think it's a good card. And now I've put that on record. So if I am wrong and I get wrecked for it, so be it. I like getting surprised. I like being wrong about cards. It's fine. But you better bring a list. If you're going to tell me all the uses for the Ozolith in comments, which you're welcome to do, money where your mouth is. Where's your deck list? So I can run it and see just how broken your idea is. The Tri-Lands. Probably the moment you've all been waiting for. The one I get asked the most about. Should I craft the lands from the set? I'm the guy who told you that you do need to craft the Shocklands. I'm the guy who told you to craft Fabled Passage. I'm the guy who told you not to craft the Temples. Where do I fall on these Tri-Lands? They have this creature type, this land type, the basic land types of Mountain, Plain, Swamp. That means that they play well with the castles. So your castles aren't useless. That is a very good thing. They enter the battlefield tapped. They slow the format down. The format is very aggressive. You can only play so many tap lands. That's a problem. They produce 3 different colors, and they cycle for 3. 3 is a lot to cycle a land. I'm glad they have it, but 3 is a lot. You're not going to cycle too often, unless you're in a legitimate flood out. So don't overvalue the cycling. So here's where I fall on these. If you plan to play 3 color or more decks, these are significant upgrades, and if you have the rare wildcards, I would craft 3 of each of these if you're going to play those colors. What I wouldn't do is I wouldn't craft, say, this to add to your black-red Rakdos deck because it has cycling. I think some people might make that mistake. I think you're better off sticking with your Fabled Passage or your Temples. If you have the Temples already, the cycling isn't a significant upgrade over the Temple, because cycling 3 is a lot. If you're going to craft these, make sure that you plan to play the 3-color deck that they go in, and I would craft up to 3. I don't think you need the 4th copy. I think there's diminishing returns here. I think the difference between the 4th copy and a Fabled Passage isn't that great, for example. So I've given a 3 to this, and because there's 5 of them, that's 15 frickin' wild cards. And it's amazing how much that drives up the total crafting cost of the set. So here we are at the bottom of the list. The total rares to craft for this set are 58. I believe the crafting guide was like in the 40s for Theros Beyond Death. Somebody might correct me on this, but 58 is a lot of rares. And then in the Mythic section, there's actually more than I expected, 25. So from that standpoint, I think this set has a lot of playable cards, maybe more than Theros Beyond Death actually did, although the lands have a lot to do with that. And I think that there's a lot to it, which is you should be selective with how you craft always, but I think it's even more helpful to have sample deck lists to help you decide, like, do I want to play this? How much does this add to my deck? Should I spend these wildcards in this way? Hopefully you find this crafting guide helpful. As a quick review, let's look at the cards where I recommended 3 or more of it. Those tend to be the ones that have the highest impact on the format going forward. So let's grab those really quick. There's a 4. There's a 3. Honestly, it's a lot of different cards. Not nearly as many 3s or 4s as I think I've done in the past, especially if you don't count the lands. Yeah, not that many. There's really just a top 6 here if you don't. So to wrap up the 6 cards that I recommend 3 or more, Mothra, aka the Luminous Brood Moth, especially for you sacrifice gamers. Sea-Octopus for you tempo and flash and mutate gamers, recommending 4 copies of that. Narset of the Ancient Way for your super frienders, and you Jeskai Fire Z types, recommending 3 copies of that. Slitherwisp for you flashers. Yep, I'm recommending 4 of this because I think this card is absolutely nuts and flash is particularly pushed. And the Song of Creation for you brewing psychopaths out there. Just Aether Gust it, Teferi's Time Twist it, and proceed to draw a million cards and wreck your opponent. A true brewing inspiration card. That brings us to the end of the crafting guide. Make sure you hit the link, make sure you follow. If you enjoyed this, please remember to like and subscribe. If you found it helpful, you can support the channel through a number of ways, which are found in the description. And you can use the promo code CGB5 for a discount at Cool Stuff Inc. if you've got some shopping to do for gaming stuff, possibly IKORIA. And remember to come out to the early access event on Twitch on Wednesday. Should be the day after you watch this video, and you can see me playing with some new cards. And I hope this got you excited for the new set. I certainly am. Thank you for watching this video. As always, I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.